Hello, Seth Peterson here, and today we're talking about the second step in the home buying process, which is find one realtor to work with. So first we have to ask ourselves, why not go it alone? Why get a realtor? And the short answer, it's really two answers, is representation, and you shouldn't have to pay for it. So let's dive in. We're going to dive into the representation side of it. The video would get too long if I talked about how they got paid also. So we'll link to another video where I talk about how realtors get paid. And we'll focus on representation here. So let's talk about who represents who in a real estate transaction. And first we need to know that around 90% of listings, the seller has a broker representing them. So they have a realtor on their side, working for their best interest. So it's really 10% or less than 10% of sellers who don't have that. And that's going to include a lot of builders and different situations like that. So it's going to be a real small percentage of sellers who just are truly for sale by owner and don't have a realtor. So let's take a look at this diagram. And this is basically laying out the scenarios when the seller does have the realtor. So this is like 90% of properties that are for sale, basically. So the first scenario that you see there is if the buyer doesn't have an agent at all. So this is like when the buyer drives down the street, they see a for sale sign, they call the number, and most likely they're going to get a hold of the listing agent at that point. So this is that played out where the listing agent shows them the house and sells them the house. So there's no other agent involved. It's just the listing agent who is working for the seller. So the buyer is talking directly with the person who owes fiduciary responsibilities to the seller. So it's really not an advantageous spot for the buyer in that situation. So looking at that diagram, the second one is when the buyer does have, or at least is talking to an agent, but they don't have buyer agency. So this is like if you're online on Zillow or Realtor.com or something like that, and you're browsing at listings and you click on like, I want to know more about this house, or I want to schedule a showing. So what likely is going to happen is you're going to get designated a random agent who's going to call you or email you, and that agent, it might be the listing agent, but a lot of times it's someone advertising on Zillow or Realtor.com or something like that. So then you're going to have this random agent, show you the house. So that second part of the diagram is the buyer working with that agent, but not signing a buyer agency contract. And once it gets to a point of negotiation, like writing an offer, the realtor has to choose if they're going to work for the buyer or the seller. Or I should say the buyer has to choose. So in this scenario, for whatever reason, the buyer chose not to sign a buyer agency contract, which means that realtor is now working for the seller. So here we have two agents, a part of the transaction, but both of them are actually working for the seller, and the buyer has no one representing them. So the third scenario, and this is why you want to find one realtor to work with, is because you want someone who's on your side. Because the seller has someone on their side. The seller has someone giving them advice and working for their best interest. So the buyer, it's very advantageous to find a realtor that you trust, sign a buyer agency contract, and then you have a realtor, an experienced professional who's giving you advice, working for your best interest, who owes you fiduciary responsibilities. So that's what we're looking at here. So this is why you really want to find one realtor to work with. If you're just kind of bouncing around from realtor to realtor, there's a good chance you might end up in that first or second scenario. Or maybe in the second scenario, maybe you choose to sign a buyer agency contract, but you just met that realtor. Who knows if there's someone that you work well with, and how experienced are they, and so forth. So it's much better to early on in the process, find someone that you like and trust, and sign that buyer agency contract, and then you're getting advice from them the whole way through. So that's talking about the representation side. Again, there's another video I'll talk about in terms of why, as a buyer, you very likely will not have to pay a commission for this. So it's a really good idea to find that realtor, because you get representation and you should not have to pay for it. So that's step 2. Next time we will talk about step 3, when you start viewing properties. All right, see you next time.